Hey, welcome back. So, as you can see, this time I decided to film the right way. Last time I filmed in portrait mode because I guess I just totally forgot how to make YouTube videos. Um, from this video on, everything will be filmed the right way with the camera adjusted into full screen. See all this space we got going on? Get used to all this greatness. It's here to stay. So in my last video, I covered 7 differences between Korean culture and Western culture. And those were essentially just things that I wish somebody had told me before I came to Korea. Today, we're gonna be kind of covering the other end of the spectrum, which is how Koreans view Western culture. And specifically how you as a foreigner will be perceived in Korea. So let's begin. Our topic for today is living as a foreigner in South Korea. I have rewritten this script 4 times, and this is my 4th time filming this video. So the reason for that is because the subject material is a little on the sensitive side. It pertains to race and how Koreans basically will just view the differences that you as a Westerner will be bringing into their culture, and what questions to expect and what troubles to expect from coming from a different culture and being perceived through a Korean's cultural lens. Let's go ahead and move forward and talk about what it looks like being a foreigner in South Korea. Now, the last thing I want to do is insult your intelligence by telling you a bunch of things that you already know. You've worked jobs in the past, presumably, and you've lived a lot of life up until this point. And you've probably met a lot of people too, unless you're a homeschooler. As is the case with living anywhere, in Korea, you're gonna meet all kinds of people. Some Koreans you're gonna click with immediately, you're gonna have a lot of similarities, and being around them will feel good. You'll have synergy, you'll just seem to click with them. Contrarily, there will be some people who you don't understand at all, whether you have different motivations or different ways of looking at the world. You're just not gonna click with them. You'll meet people who look like you, and you're gonna meet people who have the same tastes as you, and you'll meet people who don't at all. Likewise, you'll meet people who you politically agree with and people who you politically disagree with. You know that. The human race is a beautiful mosaic of variety, and that's okay. Now, obviously, the kind of people that you're gonna spend the most time with are gonna be Koreans. And that's where I'm gonna spend most of my focus today. But also note that living in a community full of expats will give you a lot of opportunity to meet people of different ethnicities, backgrounds, and creeds, probably more than you'd think. In my 2 years living in South Korea, I've met all kinds of people from tons of different countries, more than I would have met at home in Southwest Missouri. But the people you're primarily going to deal with is Koreans, and they will always see you as a foreigner. I have friends here who have gotten married to Koreans and even had kids in Korea. And despite jumping through all of those hoops and becoming so attached to the culture, they're still seen as foreigners. In the US, for example, although it's very hard to become a US citizen, somebody from another country can eventually become an American. If you, say, marry a Korean and get an F visa, you're still not considered a Korean unless you are biologically a Korean. So as a foreigner, there's always going to be a gap between you and the culture here, and that's something you just have to accept. Before we get started though, I would like you to give yourself a hand. You really owe it to yourself. If you're watching this video, you're considering doing something that a lot of people are too afraid to do. You're looking into what it's like living in another culture, and that takes a lot of open-mindedness, flexibility, and most of all, guts. So give your bad self some recognition. Living life in another culture is one of the most vulnerable things that you can possibly do, because it's one of the only situations where everything you've learned doesn't apply anymore. In a lot of ways, it's like being a kid again. You're not really aware of the customs or the folkways or the trends. And until you spend a lot of time in the culture, you're kind of gonna be clueless to those things. And that's okay. Now, the number 1 tip that I can give you to be able to build any kind of intercultural understanding is have an open mind. If you're taking notes right now, go ahead and write that down in all caps and then triple underline it. It should be your mantra whenever you're traveling, because wherever it is that you're traveling, you're the visitor there. And this extends far beyond traveling to Korea. Whatever society it is that you're looking to visit, they have pre-established rules and customs that were there long before you got there. And you should respect them. In my line of work, I find that the best teachers are the people who are willing to learn. And if you show your Korean friends and acquaintances that you're willing to learn a little bit about their culture, it's gonna go a long way. Now, if you're looking into visiting or even living in Korea, I bet you've done a little bit of your own research. And if you haven't, that's okay, there's always time to learn. So with that, let's go ahead and start talking about what it's like to be a foreigner in South Korea. So let me start this section off by saying that most Koreans are incredibly open-minded and accepting. A lot of times when I walk into the grocery store or check out at the checkout counter, if a Korean has the ability to speak English, they obviously see that I'm a foreigner. Not too many 6-foot-tall, curly-headed white dudes walking around Korea. They actually try to do business with me in English. And it's actually really sweet and endearing. But although most Koreans are really nice and considerate when it comes to you being a foreigner here, not all of them are. Some Koreans will treat you differently because you look very obviously like a foreigner. And I want to make sure that if you're looking on visiting Korea, that you're prepared for what you might run into. Unfortunately, discrimination exists everywhere, and Korea is no exception. According to the World Atlas, South Korea is one of the most homogenous people groups on the planet, meaning that the majority of everybody here is, you guessed it, a Korean. And although there is an ever-increasing population of immigrants and expats living in South Korea, you are by far a minority here, which was a first for me being a white guy from small-town USA, but it's been a needed perspective change for me. It's been very interesting to see what it's like being a minority for once in my life. Moving on. If you're coming from a country like the UK or Australia, certain parts of the US or Canada, you might be more used to an ethnically diverse population. You might come from a salad bowl of different ethnicities, colors, and creeds. And while you might not think twice about seeing a foreigner on the London Tube, Koreans are likely to pay a little bit more attention to the fact that you're a foreigner, especially if you don't live in one of the big cities like Seoul or Busan. Your appearance will make you stand out here. And occasionally you might get treated a little bit differently because of it. And that might make you feel uncomfortable. Koreans just aren't used to seeing foreigners as much. They likely aren't accustomed to features such as black, white, or brown skin, curly, blonde, or red hair, green, blue, or hazel eyes. And because Korea is so appearance-based, any one of these features might cause somebody to take interest in you and prompt a harmless, though a lot of times uncomfortable question. I've also had Koreans make comments about my and some of my friends' height, weight, and beauty. These questions, while often not malevolent, they just come from a place of genuine curiosity, are not always necessarily right either. If a curious Korean ever asks you a question that makes you feel uncomfortable, you're well within your rights to inform them that they've offended you. Now let me back that up with saying that the majority of Koreans are just curious about you in a very innocent manner. As I said, foreigners aren't too commonly seen in South Korea, and when a Korean sees you, they likely just want to speak English with you or learn about you. So try to take those insensitive questions as a teaching moment to be able to explain about your culture and about yourself. And try not to be too offended, even if some of the content of the questions are offensive in nature. A lot of what Koreans know about Western culture is just what they see on TV. And as we know, TV is the perfect depiction of society. Kind of, not at all. A lot of times, bad stereotypes can be gleaned from TV. Personally for me, I've been asked some uncomfortable questions. None of which I would personally consider offensive, but I definitely have friends who have been asked questions that are totally offensive. And as I mentioned before, if that's the case, you are always within your rights to tell somebody that they've offended you. You don't have to just roll over and take it. You're a guest here. Whether you're here for tourism or business, or you're looking to teach like I do, you're providing some kind of service or patronage to this country, and you should be treated well. Here's a list of some of the questions that I have been asked, totally unironically, by Koreans. Do all Americans own guns? Do you own a gun? Westerners are so open-minded. Do you usually have multiple girlfriends at once? Have you had a lot of one-night stands? Did you drink in high school? Did you do drugs in high school? I think that America has a lot of divorce. Are your parents divorced? And while the answer to all of these questions is yes, of course, it doesn't change the fact that it still made me feel uncomfortable when I was asked them. No, I'm just kidding. But seriously, If a Korean begins to ask you uncomfortable questions, remember to keep your cool, keep an open mind, and try to use the moment as a teaching opportunity to tell them a little bit about yourself and about your culture. However, I encourage you to always be calm and respectful in your corrections. And also know that your efforts aren't one-sided. A lot of the Koreans I've met actively are trying to learn about foreigners' culture. They're just curious. Foreigners are interesting, and they don't know much about them. So try to be a source of elucidation. Hey guys. Thanks for bearing with me through today's video. Cultural sensitivity can be a really hard thing to talk about, but nonetheless, I think it still needs to be talked about. Before I uploaded this video, I went ahead and ran everything past my Korean girlfriend, and she said I was spot on about pretty much everything. But if I was wrong about any of the comments I made on how Koreans perceive Western culture, feel free to critique me or correct me in the comments below. I want to be as accurate as possible, and you can't hurt my feelings on this. If this video was informative to you and you enjoyed content like this, please consider leaving a like and subscribing. As always, I'm Christian Stewart. Have a great day.